Our news tip hotline, 528-KTRH. I'm J.P. Pritchard with Lana Hughes. The News Watch never stops at KTRH Houston. News Radio 740 AM. KTRH News Time, 8 o'clock. From ABC News, I'm Joe Templeton. After spending much of the morning strapped aboard the shuttle Atlantis waiting to go, the crew has now been told there'll be no liftoff today. The problem was not the shuttle, but the weather. For the latest, let's go live now to ABC's Vic Ratner at the Kennedy Space Center, who has been watching and waiting. Vic?
We waited all morning, Joe, for the clouds to lift and the weather to improve, but it just didn't happen. And at the end of hours, as you said, of sitting strapped in their seats, the Atlantis astronauts finally got the word to give it up for the day. NASA has not yet announced when it will try again. Forecasters tell me the weather outlook for tomorrow looks worse, but that Saturday might be possible for a launch. Sunday, a cold front is due, which might complicate efforts to launch Atlantis even further. But, Joe, one consolation for Shuttle Commander Hoot Gibson: the last time he went into space, it took seven tries to get off the ground.
Well, we hope they'll do it fewer than 7 tries this time, Vic. ABC's Vic Ratner at the Kennedy Space Center. Once off the launch pad, by the way, this flight is expected to last 3 or 4 days, with a landing at Edwards Air Force Base in California. NASA, which is not saying much about this classified mission, plans to provide word 24 hours before landing. I'll have more after this.
CBS News, I'm Bill Whitney at the Kennedy Space Center. It looks like a beautiful morning for a launch, and it is, except for unpredictable winds in the upper atmosphere. Hugh Harris, the voice of launch control, says Space Shuttle Atlantis is still no-go for liftoff because of threatening conditions between 25 and 30,000 feet.
There is a great difference between the velocity of the wind between those two levels. It increases more than 20 knots within a 1,500-foot range.
That could put unacceptable stress on the shuttle as it rockets into orbit. So Atlantis and the 5 astronauts sit on the launch pad for a second day in a row, waiting to hear if they'll get to fly. NASA spokesman Ken Senstad says the crew seems to be bearing up well.
I'm sure there's a factor of crew fatigue. Of sitting in that reclined position with your back towards the Earth is not very comfortable, to say the least.
There's just half an hour left in today's launch window. Officials don't rule out an extension, but if the weather doesn't cooperate soon, they plan to try again on Sunday. Soviet
80% of the Soviet Union and be able to peer through both darkness and cloud cover at its targets. Possible uses: verifying compliance with nuclear agreements, or perhaps even guiding B-2 stealth bombers to their targets. This morning it's been touch and go. High altitude winds were unacceptable up until just about the last minute. The launch window for today was just about to close, only about 5 or 6 minutes left in it when NASA made the announcement that we are go for launch at just about 4.5 minutes from now. Now, befitting a military mission, 5 military men comprise the crew. Navy Commander Robert Gibson is the commander of the flight. Naturally, his nickname is Hoot. At the controls, as pilot, is Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Guy Gardner, who has waited 7 years for this, his first flight. 3 mission specialists round out the roster: Navy Commander William Shepard, the Air Force Colonel Richard Mike Mullane, and Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Jerry Ross. They suited up in their bright orange pressure suits early this morning and took the Astrovan out to the launch pad, 39B, and then up into the white room and through the hatch into their seats. This flight is so secret, however, that we don't even know who's sitting where. But the crewmen have been good-natured about their enforced blackout. During a pre-flight meeting with some reporters some weeks ago, they showed up in black Lone Ranger masks and answered some of the questions put to them with, well, yes, I could tell you that, but then I'd have to kill you. Anyway, the weather, so often a mischief maker here at the Cape, did it again yesterday when it was gloomy throughout most of the launch period, and finally there was a forced 24-hour delay of the flight until this morning. Severe wind shear at an altitude of 44,000 feet was given as the reason for yesterday's scrub, because if Atlantis had to pass through those winds during the launch, its wings would have been subjected to greater aerodynamic forces than they were designed for. Today, a considerably better picture picture for the high-altitude winds, but nevertheless, they were pesky and a problem right up until a few minutes ago, just before that launch window closed. Last night's refueling procedure suffered a minor hitch when a small leak developed in the launch pad liquid oxygen supply system, but a troubleshooting team fixed that problem in a little less than 2 hours, and the tanking was resumed. The glitch did cause the countdown to fall a bit behind, and apparently the astronauts were permitted to sleep in a little longer than was originally planned. But the standard procedure in countdowns is to have a number of built-in hold periods which then allow the launch teams to catch up when a minor delay such as the one last night occurs. About 2.5 minutes to launch now. Let's listen to NASA's commentator Hugh Harris.
It is retracting. The crew has been asked to check the crew has checked the caution and warning. The clearing is complete.
Coming up on a built-in hold period, and NASA's George Diller is here with us. George, perhaps you can explain what that's all about.
Well, this should not. This is not a built-in hold. We believe we have a weather concern at one of the transatlantic abort sites, and that's being looked at. So if that clears, then we will continue past T-minus 31. That's where the ground launch sequencer hands off to Atlantis. If we have decided that we do have a weather problem across the ocean, then we will stop at 31 and assess it.
Can we talk about which transatlantic landing site we're talking about?
No, we don't know which one has a problem because that's confidential. If you know which sites you're aiming for, then you have some idea about what the azimuth of the launch will be, and we're trying to protect that.
So with about 1 minute and 20 seconds left on the countdown clock, we're planning on a hold then at 31, is that the point?
31 seconds, that's where the ground launch sequencer would hand off to Atlantis, and Atlantis then conducts the rest of the countdown on its own.
Well, now, given the fact that the window was about to close for today, how much time can they have there with that hold before they have to say no-go?
Well, I think we're probably within just a couple of minutes of whether or not we could make the window at least as advertised at 9:32.
Just a couple of minutes.
It would be close.
When you have to stop, if we should have to stop at this close to launch, how does it affect the refueling procedure and all of that?
Well, you've already started APUs, the auxiliary power unit, so you'd probably have to go in and do some servicing there. Here we come up on 31
seconds. And holding.
All right, we did enter a hold, so we'll have to listen to what the decisions are on transatlantic weather.
Will they be likely to be coming fairly quickly, do you think?
I think they probably have gotten some indication here.
The launch director, Bob Seek, announcing that we have several minutes that we can hold at this particular point. We are in a hold because of weather conditions at the overseas transoceanic abort sites. If we pick up the clock at this point, we would go for auto-sequence start. This is when Atlantis' 4 redundant computers assume primary control of the vehicle.
Now, you don't have much time after you pick up, because you're already running the hydraulic power units on the solid rocket boosters and the auxiliary power units of the orbiter. So you've got about 5 minutes to make a decision.
We have a go for launch.
All right, we're going to continue.
We have a go for... The launch director has directed to pick up the count.
Should be starting.
3, 2, 1, T-minus 31 seconds, and
hand
counting.
It off now to Atlantis.
We have
Atlantis
a go for auto-sequence
handling
start.
The last part of the countdown.
The SRB hydraulic power units have started and moving those engine nozzles T-minus 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10. We have a go for main engine start. 7, 6. We have main engine
There's
start.
The flame.
4, 3, 2, 1.
There they go.
Ignition and liftoff. Atlantis begins another space voyage as it clears the tower.
Oh, what a sight. Always a thrill.
Blinding light.
Blinding orange flame against today a clear Florida sky, bright blues, a couple of clouds. An unusual roll pattern this time because their track is going to be more to the north than usual. So it's not appearing to go in its usual direction. Looks like it's climbing straight up in the sky. Now they're feeling the most dynamic force, their greatest shaking, as it were.
3 engines now at 65%.
Straight up into the sky. Straight up, directly above our heads. What a sight. How does it look to you, George Diller?
Offhand, it looks about as good as it could possibly look. Don't detect anything visually in this at any rate.
And we're looking straight up the tailpipe, as it were. We can see the backside of the flame as they climb now almost out of our view.
And for communication,
Atlanta's been given a go at throttle up. All 3 main engines back up to 104%.
Go with throttle up, of course.
Downrange distance 7.
That fatal moment when the last was heard from Challenger before it exploded, but they had passed that particular point in their flight.
You can get through about first 70 or 75 seconds. You've gotten through a lot of the big concerns.
Well, of course, the moment that we really wait for, I would say, would be about 2 minutes into the flight when the solid rocket boosters are spent and blasted away from the side of the rest of the vehicle.
Mark 1 minute 50. 3 engines up at 104%.
We're tracking from a tracking station up to the north now because this solid rocket booster exhaust that we see attenuates communications with the ground.
And now as they bend away downrange, they're coming back into our view, and we should be able to see solid rocket booster separation from where we sit. There they go.
SRB separation.
There they go.
Now 31 nautical miles downrange.
So perhaps the most dangerous aspect of this flight passed now with the separation of the solid rocket boosters.
First stage performance nominal according to the flight dynamics officer. That call made to the crew.
Still those 500,000 gallons of rocket fuel in the giant main external tank continue to burn, and the spacecraft's main engines carrying the load now, continuing to propel them ever faster, ever higher, and onward into orbit.
Capability to their primary overseas
landing
site.
Have a good capability now to turn around and come back should they have a problem.
3 engines still up and running at 104%.
So at this point, they have
climbing at 15.
The ability to come back to this landing site should anything go wrong. One of the next calls we'll be waiting for is to see whether they then attain the capability to go overseas and land there should they have to in the case of an emergency.
That will occur about 4 minutes into the flight.
Right now we're about 3 minutes and 20 seconds into the flight, and still
80 nautical miles
can detect a tiny little dot of light far away in the sky at this point, but still visible. An absolutely clear day here in Florida. George, it is certainly a relief when everything goes that smoothly and you hear Mission Control giving the nominal calls up to the crew. Of course, we're not going to hear very much more from them once they attain their initial orbit. It's a secret military mission, and certainly...
Control Houston, Flight Director Gary Cohen polling their positions here in the
control
center.
Negative return to the Cape now, and they'd go for transatlantic.
Still up and running at 104%.
The negative return.
Okay, so now they've passed the point where they could come back to the Cape, so they can't do that.
Negative return call just went up to the crew. That indicates they no longer have the capability to do a return to launch site aboard.
So the next big event now will be main engine cutoff at about 8.5 minutes, and then they'll jettison the external tank at 8 minutes 39 seconds.
And then they're in a coast.
That's basically it. They'll fire the orbital maneuvering system and we'll
tweaking the orbit into its proper configuration.
67
well, the first time you burn, you really have to have that first OMS orbital maneuvering system burn to achieve orbit. That's part of it. And then if you have to do a second one, that's when you're fine-tuning.
They did not have to do the second one with the launch of Discovery a couple of months ago.
That's right. That was a direct insertion, so that a lot depends on your trajectory and your planned altitude on whether or not you do 2 OMS burns or only 1. And of course, that's something we don't know with this mission, whether or not there are 2 or just 1.
The series of calls from Mission Control continuing to stream up to the crew. They now have pressed to MECO. That's main engine cutoff, meaning they have the capability to go on to that main engine cutoff point about 8.5 minutes into the flight. 5 minutes and 30 seconds or so have gone by since the beautiful launch this morning of Atlantis. On the NASA video cameras, we can still see it there.
A call just made to the crew. That call indicates they have sufficient velocity to press to main engine cutoff conditions, even if they lose one main engine. Atlantis now passing through 365%. The Group 109 call just made to Atlantis. That call indicates that should they lose two engines, they would have the capability to make their transoceanic abort, landing on one remaining Space Shuttle main engine. Now passing through 366,000 feet.
6 minutes into the flight, and as you heard commentator Brian Welch from the Johnson Space Center in Houston say,
now capable of making a TAL landing with one main engine at 104%.
That's transatlantic landing.
All three main engines still up and running at 104%. Downrange distance 365 nautical miles. 14,000 feet per second, the speed.
Sometimes I wish I could get to work in my car that fast, George.
Don't we all?
365 miles in 6 minutes and 45 seconds. That's a pretty good rate of speed, I'd say.
We're tracking through Bermuda.
Atlantis now capable of pressing to main engine cutoff conditions on one main engine at 104%, and all three are up and running at the present time.
I've noticed that
APUs, fuel cells in good shape.
I noticed that the crew has been absolutely silent throughout this flight. Is that planned part of the blackout because of the nature of the mission?
That's right. That's part of the protection
Atlantis
for
now
mission requirements.
miles downrange.
Next mission with your air to ground.
They're usually, I mean, they are very, very busy in the early minutes of flight, but they usually have some comment to make back down to the ground, which we were not privy to today. On Discovery's flight a couple of months ago, they practiced with these infrared communication devices within the spacecraft designed to keep their chatter from leaking out and be picked up by radio operators on Earth. Are they using that system today?
I don't know if they are or not, because I understand that those were not entirely fault-free, but were working pretty well. But whether or not they decided to put them on this mission, I don't know.
600 nautical miles downrange.
Coming up on 8 minutes now, and about a half a minute away from main engine cutoff. And the period of greatest danger, of course, is over at that point.
23,000.
They are essentially coasting then, and they have very little chance that something could go wrong, at least as far as the launch sequence is concerned.
And we're standing by shortly for main engine cutoff. 700 nautical miles downrange.
Another 10 seconds here, and we should have the word.
All right, just about.
We should have a brief period where they achieve zero acceleration.
And Commander Hoot Gibson reporting to Mission Control. As we saw the data here, MECO confirmed.
Main engine cutoff confirmed, and they are on their way at this point, no question about that. All right, so Atlantis up and away, a beautiful launch, apparently a faultless launch, and George Diller of NASA, thank you very much for being with us.
ET separation, good main engine cut
word
off.
on the tank, so they're really
tank is gone. Shape. They are in good shape. This has been a CBS News special report, Secret Mission, the Flight of Atlantis. At the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, I'm Christopher Glenn, CBS News.
Enroll. KLB. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition and liftoff. Atlantis begins another space voyage as it clears the tower.
2 tedious days of waiting finally paid off half an hour ago when the weather improved enough to allow Space Shuttle Atlantis to get off the launch pad. And get off it did with a cloud of white smoke, the blinding flame of its 3 main engines, and then a deafening, shaking roar rolling across the Cape. Atlantis took off toward the northeast, apparently on a trajectory to deploy a secret military spy satellite in orbit over the Soviet Union. 2 minutes and 7 seconds into the flight, with the Johnson Space Center in Houston already in control, the critical blow-off of the solid rocket boosters.
SRB separation. Now 31 nautical miles downrange.
Downrange and moving fast out over the Atlantic on a trajectory that would take it up along most of the northeast coast of the United States. Brian Welch, the voice of Mission Control.
A very clean ascent for Atlantis. No problems encountered on the way to orbit. No system problems whatsoever to report. Main engines have cut off. The external tank has dropped away. And Atlantis is on her way to orbital insertion.
Astronauts Hoot Gibson, Guy Gardner, Richard Mullane, Jerry Ross, and William Shepard had spent hours waiting for a go. Wind shear in the upper atmosphere was the problem, but finally, with just minutes to go in the announced launch window, NASA said the weather had improved enough to allow a launch. The mission is expected to last about 4 days, with a landing at Edwards Air Force Base in California.
CBS News, I'm Mike Pulsifer. This is in orbit, blasting off this morning from the Kennedy Space Center, a day behind schedule because of bad weather. Ed Crane is at Kennedy. Ed, now that Atlantis is in orbit, we're not going to hear much about it, are we?
No, we're not, Mike. Within the half hour, we are expected to hear that NASA has given the crew the okay to begin its orbital maneuvers. We will not be told precisely what those maneuvers are. It is a secret military mission, but it's been widely reported that that mission is to launch a spy satellite over the Soviet Union. When Atlantis lifted off today, it went to the north, giving some indication that, yes, indeed, it might be heading towards the USSR.
There is not even a confirmation as to how long the space shuttle flight will last, is there?
No, speculation centers on 3 to 4 days, and NASA says we will not be told when the crew is coming home until about 24 hours from touchdown at the California dry lake bed.
That's Ed Crane in Florida. Unemployment.
CBS News, I'm Bill Vitka. A dramatic in silence, a military mission does its classified duty. The space shuttle Atlantis is believed to be on a path that takes it over the Soviet Union. The Air Force, which has total control of the mission, has not announced the cargo, which has been widely reported as a spy satellite known as La Crosse. It's believed that payload will be deployed sometime today, and when La Crosse is fully extended, it will be half the size of a football field. It's said to use radar imaging, which can see through clouds, is able to detect moving objects on the ground like tanks, and the satellite can recreate what it sees in 3D. That eye in the sky will cover the Soviet Union, and former U.S. arms negotiator Paul Warnke said it will not provoke the Kremlin, but help keep the peace.
So the more we know about that, the more reassurance we have, the less the risk there is of nuclear war.
While much is now known about the payload, only the Pentagon knows when it will be deployed. Return of the space shuttle is expected Monday, but there will be no announcement until 24 hours beforehand.
CBS News, I'm Betsy Rosenberg.
New York braces for Mikhail Gorbachev's media and diplomatic blitz. Argentina's government is back in control for now. President-elect Bush expected to name Elizabeth Dole to UN post. Good morning, Bill Lynch with the CBS World News Roundup. Satellite in orbit over the Soviet Union, the crew of Shuttle Atlantis is winding down their secret mission. Christopher Glenn reports the silence is deafening at the Mojave Desert landing site.
Not an official word from anyone yesterday or last night about Atlantis or its crew. There was a scheduled drill by the ground convoy that will surround the orbiter once it touches down, including a simulated smoke-in-the-cabin emergency. Air Force spokesman Lieutenant Colonel Jerry Guess gave some skimpy details.
They would take personnel out of the orbiter and evaluate them and then medevac them out if necessary.
One thing that's almost a given here is good weather for landing the shuttle when it happens. NASA's Nancy Lovato.
We're looking for moderate temperatures, perhaps light and variable winds, very light clouds. Just plain good weather.
Meteorologists do say that the winds at the high desert landing strip could start picking up Tuesday or Wednesday. Christopher Glenn, CBS News, Edwards Air Force Base, California.
Leaves Moscow, next stop, New York. PLO Chief Arafat in Sweden for meetings with an American Jewish delegation. B-52 crashes in Michigan. Top Air Force commander dies in crash in Spain. Good morning, Bill Lynch with the CBS World News Roundup. This, as we hear from Christopher Glenn.
Wheels on the dry lake bed runway is scheduled for 3:36 p.m. Pacific time on the 5th day after liftoff. Judging by the ecstatic comments of Shuttle Program Chief Richard Truly and other NASA officials about the flight generally, it's presumed the crew's reported mission to deploy a satellite to spy on the Soviet Union was accomplished. But the secrecy will persist right to the end. The public has not been invited to watch this shuttle landing, and NASA's Lisa Malone says the military will be there even after the orbiter rolls to a stop.
We will have at least one vehicle for the Department of Defense and the convoy that goes out to meet the shuttle on the runway after it lands.
And what's the mystery vehicle's purpose?
I don't know.
Christopher Glenn, CBS News, Edwards Air Force Base, California.
It's 2 p.m.
CBS News, this is Doug Poling. Soviet Atlantis is homeward bound. CBS News reporter David Clark is at Edwards Air Force Base in California, where the shuttle will land later today.
What NASA calls one of its most important missions is just about over. In a couple of hours, the Atlantis braking rockets will fire to start the shuttle's return to the giant lake bed runway at Edwards Air Force Base. There's some high clouds, but otherwise the weather is perfect for touchdown.
During the 4-day flight, the 5-member crew reportedly deployed a military satellite designed to spy on the Soviet Union.
CBS News, I'm Mike Moss. Soviet secret military mission is just about over, and CBS News correspondent Christopher Glenn has a report from the landing site in California.
No turning back now. Atlantis is out of orbit and heading home. About a half hour ago, the spacecraft's 2 braking rockets were fired up for a little more than 3 minutes, precisely enough to send them hurtling downward. NASA commentator Billy Deason says everything went well.
This is Mission Control. The propulsion officer reports that the burn is completed and looked good. We had data, telemetry from Atlantis all during that burn, so we were able to observe the telemetry readouts on that.
A few minutes from now, the heat on the orbiter from the friction of the atmosphere will cause a communications blackout. When they come out of that, it's down, down, down to landing on the dry lake bed runway and an end to what's been described as a highly successful and highly secret military mission. Christopher Glenn, CBS News, Edwards Air Force Base, California. This is the CBS News Special Report, Secret Mission, the Flight of Atlantis. I'm Christopher Glenn at Edwards Air Force Base in California. Well, they're nearly here. Hoot Gibson, Guy Gardner, Mike Mullane, Jerry Ross, and Bill Shepard, military officers all, riding down from orbit in the shuttle, which glowed red hot as the friction of the upper atmosphere tore at the orbiter's heat shield tiles, hot enough to erase communications with the ground for several long minutes not too long ago. And then, as they emerged from the communications blackout, a series of twists and turns to line them up for their landing here in the high Mojave Desert. They should be wheels on the runway a little bit more than 3 minutes from now, after nearly 4.5 days in flight and an estimated 69 orbit, 1.7 million mile voyage, the last shuttle mission of the year. Now, we say estimated because that's exactly the case. Officially, we don't know where they've been or what they've been doing. The Air Force owned this flight, paid $70 million to buy it, and that gave them the right to make the rules, which can be summed up in 3 words: keep it secret. True, NASA provided some commentary for liftoff last Friday, and then several hours later passed the word the shuttle was go for orbital operations. And that was about it. Utter silence until the announcement yesterday that Atlantis would be coming down this afternoon. What were they doing up there? Well, if you can read or have ears to listen with, you probably know the widespread stories about a giant spy satellite being carried in the cargo bay worth perhaps $500 million and able to scan 80% of the USSR through the darkness or the clouds, which was said to have been lifted and dropped off in orbit using the shuttle's long mechanical arm. Was the maneuver successful? Who knows for sure. But the NASA top brass have been ecstatic about the way the flight has been going, gushing over it, and we can only presume that the deployment was a success. And now, high overhead, we can see Atlantis, a white dot in a gauzy, cloudy sky, 2 sonic booms heralding its arrival in the area, coming down at a steep inclination, heading toward the desert floor, going around what they call in the Air Force the heading alignment cylinder, a big, wide circle to bring them around and into precise location for coming down on the 7.5 mile long runway on the Rogers Dry Lake bed, which is stretched out in front of our view, giant brown bowl there. The shuttle very much in view this time, this late afternoon touchdown unusual. There have only been 4 afternoon touchdowns in the 27 flights of the shuttle program before, and it looks as if we're going to have them in sight all the way home. Still sweeping around in that big broad circle, and they'll be coming back pretty soon. We have with us Alan Wood, who is with the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, and certainly an old hand in manned space flight. And Alan, this was a rather unusual way for them to approach this time. It had something to do with the nature of the orbital path that they followed, didn't it?
Yes, it did, Chris. The path they followed was what they call a polar orbit. In order to cover a larger area of the Earth.
Yeah, going high up above the equator and then down below.
Right.
Yeah. And so they probably came across the coast where this time, would you say?
Well, it appears to be kind of in a different direction slightly from what was before. I couldn't tell exactly because I didn't pick it up soon enough.
Uh-huh. Maybe San Juan Capistrano somewhere down there.
Well, previously they did that on some of the orbiter missions that where they flew the imaging radar.
Mm-hmm.
But this one came in from the west, and I couldn't tell exactly where.
Yeah. We've lost sight of the orbiter now. It's ducked behind a cloud deck, and here it comes back out again, and it's beginning its final approach to the desert lake bed runway at this point. A white dot in the sky, coming down very steeply.
Comes down very steeply.
Very much more steeply than landing in a commercial airliner. If you had to land like that on your standard 747, I'm sure we'd all be scared witless. But these are experienced pilots, certainly who Gibson is, and they know what they're doing. Gibson said he was going to turn over the controls to Guy Gardner, who is the pilot on this flight, for a few minutes anyway, to give him some experience perhaps for a future mission in which he'll be commander. And now the shuttle coming down, perhaps 1,000 feet off the runway at this point, very steeply, very fast, heading down, down, down. The landing gear not yet deployed. It will be deployed just 15 seconds before touchdown. We can even hear the sound that the shuttle is making as it approaches the runway. Chase plane flying right alongside of it, a few hundred yards away. A bit of a flare as they come within, in fact, perhaps 50 feet of touchdown at this point, right directly in front of our line of sight, heading for weight on the main gear, and we'll see a puff of smoke when it happens. Any second now. And let's see. There we go. Pretty as a picture, smooth as glass. Just a little bit of a dust plume. This is not a paved runway. This is hard pan on the dry lake bed. And we have the landing gear, the main landing gear down and the nose gear down now, and the shuttle is rolling out to a stop. This secret military mission just about has come to its conclusion. What happens at this point? Well, the service convoy, a multi-vehicle convoy, is about to race out and surround the orbiter, ready to make sure that no noxious gases from the chemicals that they use for propellants are still floating around that could cause some problems for the crew inside, and taking other procedures to make sure that everything is okay. It'll be some 45 minutes to an hour, more or less, before the doors open and the crew steps back out of Atlantis on Earth for the first time in 4.5 days or so, perhaps a little bit wobbly as they try to get their Earth legs back after being in weightlessness for so long. But after that, there'll be some welcoming ceremonies in a couple of hours for them at the NASA facility here at Edwards Air Force Base, and then they'll climb in their jets and fly themselves back to their homes in Houston. As far as the shuttle itself is concerned, well, there will be towed off the dry lake bed runway perhaps a couple of hours from now and over to a 100-foot-tall steel tubular structure called the mate-demate device, believe it or not, where it will be literally hoisted up in the air and onto the back of a specially modified jumbo jet for its flight on back to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. So we have a successful mission, and as was pointed out by the NASA brass, they are just happy as they can be about it. Happy as hell, is the way they exactly put it, as a matter of fact. The national anthem to welcome them home. And we have a bit of that. Altogether, a successful flight as Shuttle Atlantis comes rolling home. The brass are very happy, NASA brass especially, because of the fact that now they have both Discovery and Atlantis proven in flight after the Challenger tragedy so many months ago. This has been a CBS News special report, Secret Mission, the Flight of Atlantis. At Edwards Air Force Base in California, I'm Christopher Glenn, CBS News.
This is The World Tonight. Good evening, I'm David Jackson, CBS News. Shuttle mission of Atlantis has come to a dusty pinpoint end at Edwards Air Force Base in California. CBS News correspondent Christopher Glenn is there. Chris, was it just as pretty as the other shuttle touchdowns?
I'd say prettier, David. It was a late afternoon landing, unusual for shuttles, and the sun was in just the right position. We could track it all the way down from a tiny dot in the sky until the time it rolled out to a stop. It was pretty as a picture.
Well, last time when the astronauts came down from the last shuttle mission, they had a vice president meeting them. What is ahead for the Atlantis 5?
The Atlantis 5 are going to have a brief welcome home ceremony here in an hour or so, and then they're going to fly themselves back to Houston. None of the hoopla that surrounded the Discovery mission a couple of months ago. This one was completely secret, bought by the Air Force. Secret it was indeed.
CBS News correspondent Christopher Glenn at Edwards Air Force Base in California.